Okay, everyone. Good morning. Good morning. We're going to get started just a minute or two early with some announcements. For those of you that don't know me, my name is John Reardon. Welcome to the March edition of the Men's Morning of Reflection at St. Peter Chanel. Thank you all for coming out. We're very grateful to have you here. So we're short one priest this morning, so we're going to have the amateur provide the blessing. So if you'll join me, in the name of the Father, Son, and the Holy Spirit, amen. Heavenly Father, we are so grateful, humbled, and just stand in awe of you this morning and all that you have done for this parish, for the gentlemen assembled here, and for this ministry. Heavenly Father, we ask that you please send the Holy Spirit upon this group, especially to Dr. Paul Voss this morning, and to each one of us, that we may internalize what he says, that we may hear it, Lord, and that we will provide the courage to go forth and act on it. Heavenly Father, we pray for those who are not with us this morning, and we pray especially that the men here will be fortified and we will be able to wrap up a strong Lenten season in preparation for the resurrection of your Son, Christ. We ask this through your Son and our brother, Lord Jesus Christ. Amen. For the Son, Holy Spirit. Amen. Okay, so there's a sign-up sheet in the back, again, as we usually mention. If you'd like to have your email added to the email list, please fill that out. Also, if you'd like to join us for one of the small group meetings that happen every Friday this time, so this is the third Friday of the month. Every Friday we meet in small group sessions. You can just click that box on your name there. Confessions are offered in the back. The bathroom is also in the back. Make sure you get in the correct line. And also, these sessions are being recorded and hosted on the St. Peter Chanel YouTube site. So if you have questions, and we have time for questions and answers at the end, please wait for the microphone to get to you so that your question can be on the recording as well. And as always, we will try to get you out of here by 8:30 this morning. So without further introduction, because we've got a full program this morning, I'd like to introduce Dr. Paul Voss.
Oh, I thought you said without further introduction.
Oh, I'm sorry. Without further delay. Well, you can come on up here. They don't want to hear me talk anymore anyway. Dr. Paul Voss is the president of Ithikos, a consulting organization specializing in culture, leadership, and executive coaching. He's also, in his spare time, an associate professor at Georgia State University, where he offers courses on Shakespeare, Dante, business ethics, Renaissance literature, and the history of the book. He publishes on a wide variety of topics, both for academic audiences and the popular press, and regularly appears on television and radio programs. He was recently profiled in the Wall Street Journal. His clients include the FBI, Cox Communications, Manheim Automotive, General Electric Energy, McKesson, Mizuno, Chick-fil-A, Chubb Insurance, Foot Locker, Chick-fil-A, huh? Can you help us out with the, In March 2019, he addressed the executive session of NATO Supreme Command Headquarters, Special Forces in Belgium. It is believed he is the first professor of literature ever invited to address NATO. Dr. Voss and his wife Mary have 5 children, and they live in suburban Atlanta. And we're very grateful to have you back here.
Thank you so much. I'm delighted to be here. I'm going to maybe look over here. Is that better if we go over here?
Sure.
Yeah. I'm going to begin for the largest part of 10,000 years. Do I need this? For about 10,000 years, the life expectancy of a typical human was 40 years of age. At 40 years of age, this is what it looks like. Spring of your life is 1 to 10, summer's 10 to 20, 20's 30 to 20 to 30 is autumn, and 30 to 40 is the winter of your life. So in the spirit of Lent, let's go up to the 18th century, where the life expectancy now becomes 60 years of age, and you can see the adjustments accordingly. But let's go to today. The average life expectancy is around 80 years. For men, it's a little bit less than women. The third leading cause of death for men between the ages of 45 and 55 is actually suicide. It's lowering our life expectancy. But if you look at this breakdown today, now it's 1 to 20 is the spring of your life. That's your youth, right? Your children can still be considered knuckleheads between the age of 1 and 20. 20 to 40 then is the summer of your life, right? That's where you're firing on all cylinders. you're supposed to be at your physical best. 40 to 60 then becomes the autumn of your life. That's when you're starting to harvest some of the seeds that you have planted, right? You're starting to reap in all those benefits. And 60 to 80 now becomes the winter of your life. Well, the reason I'm starting with this is because last month I just turned 60. So last month I entered officially into the winter of my life. Now I know it's just a number, but let's face it, it's a big number. When you're 40 or 50, you can kind of convince yourself that the best is yet to come and that you're still once what you were. But when you're 60, you actually realize that things are starting to diminish a little bit. And you start thinking about mortality a little bit more because as you get to be our age, some of your friends have already passed on. Some of your parents have already passed on. It doesn't occur, a week doesn't go by without somebody that you know probably falling ill or somebody having a funeral. But I remember as a small child, I grew up in a small town in central Minnesota, we had church bells that would ring every morning at 7 o'clock to wake you up, 12 o'clock noon to signify lunch, 6 o'clock to signify dinner, and 10 o'clock to signify it's time to go to bed. But every once in a while, the church bells would ring at 10:30 or 2:30. My mom would say, Paul, get on your bike and go up to the church and see who's passed away. Because that was how my small town signified the death of somebody who was a member of the souls of the faithful departed. See, I spent a lot of time in cemeteries. I know that's going to sound weird to you, but as a historian, I've been to every cemetery of every dead president, every vice president, lots of celebrities. But I publish on Christian burial practices. It's one of my areas of research interest. And here's what I found out. Throughout the course of human history, it doesn't matter what tribe, race, religion, culture, civilization you belong to, there's some kind of rite, some kind of ritual when the person dies. Human beings need to have some kind of time to grieve, and there has to be some kind of process. There's no society or culture that just takes the dead body and throws it into the dumpster. In the Christian community, we have cemeteries. We're buried and we usually have monuments to our life. And I remember this poem when I was in college, and it didn't dawn on me when I was a child, but this is what my mom is saying. Because I'm involved in mankind, anybody's death diminishes me. Therefore, never send to know for whom the bell tolls. It tolls for thee. So when you go to a cemetery, a Christian cemetery, you're going to see things that are familiar to you. One of the things you're going to see is a tombstone, a headstone. It's going to have a date, and it's going to have a date. Terminus a quo, terminus ad quem. And in between that date, there's going to be a small piece of punctuation. That small piece of punctuation is not a hyphen. It's actually called a dash. You know what that piece of punctuation represents?
The distance between your birth and death.
And the word for that is what? Your entire effing life. It's a dash. On your tombstone, your entire life gets a dash. That's all it gets. And I've dedicated my professional life to helping people try to animate that dash, to make that dash as vital and as real as possible. And as that dash gets closer and closer to a reality, you start feeling more and more of it, a moral imperative to really live and to be present and to offer it up and to try and follow the ways of the Lord, because that dash is the story of your life. Believe it or not, it's in one piece of punctuation. And some of you have heard me say this before, men, especially men, we tend to get our self-esteem, we tend to get our identity from our job. When a man walks up to another man without realizing it, they almost always say, what do you do? What do you do? What do you do? It's the first thing out of our mouths. It's just another polite form of way of saying, how much money do you make? How much money do you make? How much money do you make? See, our careers tend to define ourselves. And if they tend to define ourselves, look at the statistic. According to the Gallup survey, the last one they did before COVID, 70% of Americans hate their job or they're actively disengaged. See this cognitive dissonance here? Americans tend not to like their job, but yet our identity comes from our job. And there's a reason why men are committing suicide. 75% of all suicides are white males. There's something wrong with that statistic. 75%. And the reason, of course, is complicated. But one of the reasons is that human beings, especially the male of the species, when we make friends, we tend to make friends during rites of passage. We tend to make friends. We played high school football or college sports with somebody, went to the army together, we got drunk together, we were in the same frat together, we got in a fight together. There was some kind of rite of passage. And those friendships became cemented for life. And then as we get older, men have fewer and fewer rites of passage. And because we have fewer and fewer rites of passage, we therefore have fewer and fewer genuine friends. And you wake up and all of a sudden in your mid-50s and some of your friends are gone and some of them moved away and you don't have them in your life anymore and you're a little lonely. It happens to men and women when they get stuck in a rut. It happens to women earlier, 30s and 40s. Maybe they're raising children. Maybe they're trying to raise children, have a job, keep the house in order. But it happens to men with more predictability and regularity. Think of when you started working. Add 30 years. Boom. That's usually when it hits hardest. After 30 years. You've been working, you've been struggling, you're at a spot now where maybe life has, you've gained a little weight, the children maybe are out of the home, even in the most loving of relationships, maybe it's grown a little stale. The hunt and the chase of business hasn't really produced as much of a thrill for you anymore. You're kind of in that position where you've got it maybe in neutral. You can understand why people get stuck in a rut. Now, we've talked about this before, you've heard it, but look at that picture. That's a pretty vivid example of what it means to be stuck in a rut. 85% of Americans say that they get stuck in a rut from time to time. And that's not just with your work, it could be with your family, your marriage, your faith life, right? With your diet. You feel like you're a hamster on a habit trail, or you're just on the treadmill of life. You feel stuck in a rut a little bit. And so what are we going to do for that? Well, it's interesting that young people are coming up to me now, and young people are telling me they're stuck in a rut. I had a student tell me a couple days ago, Dr. Voss, I'm burnt out. I go, you're burnt out? You were never on fire. You're 21. Reading the Wall Street Journal yesterday about a business that just got shuttered in California. Tom, 23, says, I gave my entire life to that company. Right? I'm not trying to make fun of someone else's pain. This isn't idle schadenfreude here. But the 23-year-old who says, I gave my entire life to this company, he worked there 18 months. It needs a little bit of perspective, right? But it's not the young people's fault, because when Netflix came into the world, it kind of changed the expectations. Again, when I was a kid, some of you young people aren't going to believe this, we had a publication actually called the TV Guide. TV Guide came to your house, you opened it up, you found the shows that you wanted to see, you circled them, and if you wanted to watch the Cosby Show, you had to be in front of the TV Thursday night from 8 to 8:30. And if you missed it, guess what? You didn't get to see it for 6 months. It was called appointment television. You had to make an appointment with your television to see something. You had to work around the schedule of the networks. But because of Netflix, you all know this, we can watch what we want to watch, when we want to watch, where we want to watch, how we want to watch, on what device we want to watch, and how much we want to pay for that service. And our lives have been far more enriched by this, and it's far more convenient because we can get what we want, when we want, where we want, how we want it. And so these students, the young people, grew up this way. They graduate from college. They go, oh, I want a job. I want this kind of job. I want this kind of freedom. I want this kind of money. I want this kind of vacation time. I want. And they realize that the world doesn't revolve around them. I've got students who have said this year, they're seniors, they're graduating from college, and they said, work is really going to interfere with my schedule. My niece, I love her to death, and she grew up in a very affluent home. And my brother's a fabulous father and very involved. She's 23, she's got her master's degree, and she just got her first job. It's 3 afternoons a week, 4 hours a day. And she came back from her first day of work. And my brother Chris looked at her, and she's on the couch, and she's just staring vacantly into the future. He goes, Tally, what's wrong? She goes, is this all there is to life? It's just work. She works 4 hours. And she's already having this existential crisis. And Chris is trying to be a thoughtful dad. He's going, well, there's other things along the way like love and childhood, children and faith and travel and all this sort of thing. But she's already overwhelmed by the thought of work because a lot of people believe that work is oppressive. A lot of people believe that work is going to be exploitive and that all work under a capitalistic system somehow is going to be punitive. And I don't believe that, right? But they do believe that work should fit my schedule because I have things that I want to do and I'm going to try and create a career around my work. That's a very different idea than most of us had when we went out to work. And these young people are coming into the workforce with those ideas because academics are right now really trying to figure out what we call the future of work. The future of work has preoccupied all kinds of academics since COVID, right? There's always been some kind of work-life balance question. There's always been some ideas of hybrid work. What should we do with 4 10-hour work days versus 5 8-hour work days? What's the hybrid? But now it's actually, what is the future of work? How are we going to understand and justify what is AI, what is generative capabilities going to do to the future of work? But it means billions of dollars and millions of jobs. And I don't know if you saw this, but this was back in May of 2023. Wall Street Journal started looking through the generative AI programs, right? All the artificial intelligence programs. And they went and they concluded that for the first time in human history, computers and technology are coming after jobs of managers, what we used to call the white-collar workforce. Because if you look at history, almost all of the technological innovations increased strength of machinery. It replaced human muscle. 300 years ago, to be really strong, it was an advantage in the marketplace. Today, being really strong is not an advantage in the marketplace because we're all what we call knowledge workers. Bodies have been replaced by machines, and generally speaking, when machines come in, it's the frontline employee who's getting displaced. It's the front line, it's going to be the driver, it's going to be the person who's loading, it's going to be the person who's digging, it's going to be the person who's shoveling. These jobs are going to be replaced because they require a body. Bodies are going to be flexible in the future. We might not need bodies to do our work. But here's what they said, that there's going to be a replacement of knowledge workers. And they looked at a few specific cases, paralegals, some kind of medical doctors, some of the HR specialists and the programmers. And everyone's going, well, this is hype, this is hype, this is hype. Well, I'm sure because we live where you live, and we live here in Atlanta, that you saw this announcement in January. Carol Tomei, the CEO of UPS, announced that they were firing 12,000 people. Now, they've got somewhere around 400 or 420,000 people at UPS, but the vast majority of them are union workers who have just renegotiated a new contract. So they weren't even touched. The 12,000 jobs that were replaced were all managerial jobs, salaried jobs, office jobs, jobs that came with a business card, a title, jobs that came with health care benefits, jobs that were making $1.50, $1.75. These were 12,000 jobs that were gone. And if you looked at the small print of what Carol Tomei said after she made the announcement, she goes, even if we get back up to full staffing, right? She said 5 days a week. Everybody's back on staff. We are all hands on deck. We can't afford this experiment anymore and virtual learning and collaborative offices and all this. Everybody needs to get back in the office. She said, even if we get back to 110% of where we were pre-COVID, these jobs aren't coming back. She goes, we are replacing them with different types of computerization, supply chain, HR, dynamic pricing, surge pricing, entire divisions just evaporated, right? Eviscerated. So if our entire sense of self is tied to our job, and jobs are coming in and they're being displaced, or there's requiring a new shift, what are we supposed to do? Well, there's one antidote to that. There's one antidote to that that is going to mitigate this destructive kind of tendency, and I like to call it the strive for excellence. It's a virtue that the Catholic Church talks about. 12 years ago, a friend of mine wrote this book, and he wrote the book, it's called Average is Over. And the book was reviewed pretty harshly because they said, wow, this is so stark and so depressing. He goes, I'm just painting the facts. And the facts are simply this. If you're producing a product that's just average, if you're doing a work job performance that's just average, you're toast. Because if you go to a restaurant and you spend $100 at a restaurant and someone asks you how it was and you say it was just average, you're not going back. You are not going back. You know why you're not going back? Because there's lots of other restaurants out there. There are lots of other restaurants out there. So excellence is something that needs to be kind of tried to pursue, right? It doesn't mean perfection. It doesn't mean perfection, but it does mean above average. So if you look at Net Promoter Score, sometimes you go into a hotel chain, Marriott or the Hilton, they have a button that says 8 is 0. That if you're only getting 8 out of 10, you actually aren't getting anywhere. They're striving for a 9 or a 10. Because an 8 out of a 0 means that nobody's going to say they had a good time. But if they got a 9 or a 10, you're going to go home and tell your friends, oh, this was a great restaurant. I'm going to give it a 9. I'm going to give this restaurant a 9. But if you're just at an 8, nobody says, oh, I really want you to go to this restaurant. I'm going to give it an 8. They're going to go, gave it an 8? I'm not going to go to the restaurant you only gave an 8, because I know there's a lot of them out there that are a 9. But here's the thing about excellence. It can't be bought, it can't be faked, it can't be borrowed, it can't be loaned. It's the same way of achieving salvation in heaven. You don't get to get into heaven because your wife's a saint. I wish that were the case, man. I'd have a one-way ticket. You don't get into heaven because people in your community are getting into heaven. Knowledge isn't enough to get you in there. It has to be excellence, and it can't be bought, and it can't be faked, and it can't be borrowed. So what does that actually mean? Well, you're in business, and you know this. This is Business School 101. We tend to buy things from people that we know, like, and trust. We tend to buy things from people and companies and businesses that we know, like, and trust. And I'd imagine because you're Catholics and you're a lot probably like our Catholic family, a lot of that is off the back of a church bulletin. We tend to patronize a lot of the people on the back of the church bulletin because we know, like, and trust them. We know, like, and trust them because we see them in Mass every Sunday. But if you know, like, and trust somebody, there's going to be a client for you. There's going to be somebody that you can enhance that relationship with. Let me give you an example about this. How exceeding expectations, right? I tell my children all the time, here's a recipe for failure. Overpromise, underdeliver. Overpromise, underdeliver. Overpromise, underdeliver. You do that long enough, guess what? You'll be a failure. All you have to do, in other words, to be successful is to exceed expectations. Just exceed expectations. If this is the level of expectations, if you're even 1% above that, you've exceeded expectation. I gave a talk yesterday. It was really interesting. It was one of the largest commercial real estate companies, and certainly in Atlanta, maybe in the United States. There were about 100 people in there. They were required to come to this talk, and after I got done, there's a queue of people that wanted to talk to me. There's one guy who's kind of jumping up and down. He got a little flustered when he got to me. He goes, oh, Dr. Voss, that didn't suck nearly as bad as I thought it was going to. Right? Now, he didn't say it in the most eloquent way, but he was giving me a compliment, I think. But I exceeded the expectation. Because I can't wait to go home and tell my wife what I learned today. What are you doing to exceed expectations? Let me give you an example. So 7 or 8 years ago, some of you might have heard this story before, our water heater went out. Our water heater went out. I wasn't at home at the time. I said to my wife, Mary, call a plumber. She went to Google. There were about 60 people who would come over and replace that water heater. So she was a little overwhelmed with the choice. So she went on an app called the Nextdoor app, and she Googled it and said, hey, does anybody have a recommendation for some plumber to come over and fix our water heater? And she got 2 people to say the same guy. So he comes over the next day. I'm at home by now. He rings on the doorbell. I open the door. I go, oh, hi, I'll show her where the water heater is. He goes, excuse me, sir. Can I talk to your wife? Oh, can I talk to your wife? I knew why he wanted to talk to my wife. Why do you suppose you want to talk to my wife? She's the decision maker. In heterosexual households where people are married, women control 85% of discretionary spending when it comes to household finances. In my house, it's even higher than, we just got new carpet in our house. I don't even know what color it is, right? She doesn't, well, I think she's buying a new couch this week, I'm not sure, right? She makes all of these decisions because I have no time, Batman, for this. So he wants to get in front of the customer. He wants to get some FaceTime. I go, yeah, sure, I'll go get my wife. So I get my wife up there. She goes, oh, I'll show you where the water heater is. She goes, one moment, ma'am. He reaches into his back pocket. He puts these 2 blue booties on his shoes. My father was a surgeon. I've seen these blue booties my whole life, right? And I say to him, why are you putting blue booties on your shoe? He looks right at my wife. He says, ma'am, you've got a beautiful house. I promise you 2 things. I'm not going to bring any dirt into your house, and I'm going to leave your house cleaner than I found it. I looked at my wife. She swooned. Now, he was 25 and had 6-pack abs. That might have had something to do with it. But she was so impressed. He took pictures. He vacuumed. He cleaned everything up. And she went on the Nextdoor app. Oh, this guy's great. This guy's great. This guy's great. This guy's great. That's the kind of golden ring, right? You're having your clients brag on you to other potential clients. 6-7 years go by. We have a problem with plumbing. Our pressure reducing valve goes out. I'm on a trip. I talked to my wife. I said, you're going to have to call a plumber. She goes, yeah, I already did. Just talk to Nick. I go, Nick? Who's Nick? She goes, Paul, you know Nick. I go, I don't know Nick. She goes, blue booties? I go, oh, Nick. She goes, yeah, I already called him. He's coming over tomorrow. So all my wife had to do was make a booty call. All of a sudden, I think that's what the young people are calling. She makes this call. He's over there. He changes out the pressure reducing valve. My wife's got a smile on her face for a week. So she's so happy with the service. So my point is, what is your blue booty? What is your signature experience? What is your concierge level? The joke I used to make was about Chick-fil-A's bathroom, and everybody started laughing about that, but this is serious business. I don't know if you know who Gas Buddy is. Gas Buddy is a crowdsourced app that tells you where the cheapest gas in your neighborhood is, right? It's hundreds of thousands of people telling you where the cheapest gas is. I never use it because it's usually 1 cent cheaper, and it's usually half a mile away, and it's not worth 12 cents for me to drive a half a mile to save. But they have now come out with ratings of bathrooms, the cleanliness of bathrooms. And this was in 2019, just before COVID. I called them up and I said, what is the value proposition of being on this list? They said, if your name is on this list, it's probably worth $1 million a year to you in additional revenue. So, I looked at the list last week. Buc-ee's was in Texas. It's now in Louisiana, Mississippi, Alabama, Georgia, Florida, and South Carolina. It's the #1 if you haven't been to a Buc-ee's, you have to try this out, right? The Buc-ee's has 110 pumps. There are no semis there. It's a cross between a Bass Pro Shop, a Costco, and a gas station. It's got food. You can buy everything there. But if you go into their bathrooms, they got the cleanest bathrooms you've ever seen. In fact, there's a sign in their bathroom that says, our bathroom attendants make $22 an hour. That's higher than we pay any other per hour employee because we want you to have the best experience. And if you go in there, it is absolutely incredible. It is so clean, and the individual stalls are so clean. They did something in the Buc-ee's that I was just at. I don't know why nobody else has ever done. This is a game changer. So if you go to a urinal and you have shorts on, you always tell there's a little splashback, right? You don't realize when you have pants on, but you do realize when you have shorts on. You know what Buc-ee's has? They have that pad that goes all the way up the entire urinal. You can go like this the whole way up the urinal, and there's no splashback. Why didn't somebody come up with that before? So we're coming back from Florida. My wife says, sweetie, I got to stop. Can we go to I got to go to the restroom. Can we stop? I go, yeah, we can pull over right here. There's an Exxon. Or in 37 miles, there's a Buc-ee's. She goes, I'll hold it. Think about that. That's the kind of commitment to excellence that speaks volumes, because she said, I'll hold it. So if I look in the world, where do I look in the world to find an example of excellence? Well, some of you know that my son graduated from the United States Naval Academy in 2016. And when you graduate from the Naval Academy, you have to pick which service selection you're going to take. He had lots of options because he was pretty highly ranked in the academic world. I didn't know if he was going to go in the medical corps. He could have gone into the aviation. He could have gone SWO. But in his senior year, I called him up. I said, Luke, what have you decided? He goes, I'm going to go Marines. I go, you're going Marines? And I had nothing against the Marines, but it just hadn't been part of the discussion. We've been talking about this for 3 years. And I go, why are you going Marines? He goes, Dad, I just went on a test your call weekend with Marines. And guess what? Marine Corps officers eat last. I go, you're going to have to explain that to me, son. I don't understand this. He goes, Marine Corps officers make a pledge that they will never take a sip of water or bite a granola bar until each and every one of their Marines is first fed and taken care of. It It's that level of sacrifice that resonated with my son. And if you look at the Marine Corps, they've been around since 1775. They have about 180,000 active Marine Corps Marines, officers, and enlisted. And they have our glorious tradition and a glorious history. But do you know that they're Department of Navy? They're the Department of Navy, and if there's just one swipe of the pen, the Marine Corps could go away like that. Just because they've been around from 1775 doesn't mean they're going to be around for another 100 years. In fact, I talked to the brigadier generals, and we have the discussion. What season is the Marine Corps in? Is the Marine Corps in its spring? Is it in its summer? Is it in its fall? Is it in its winter? And they say, we think that we're in our spring because we are recruiting, we are educating, we're continuing to make our younger officers aware of this. And I started thinking about the legacy of the Marine Corps and what they're doing. They're changing, they're readapting. They got rid of all their tanks, for example. They no longer have any artillery capabilities. They're recommitting to their core competencies of infantry. So I was walking around San Diego not too long ago, and I walked by Ted Williams' house. Ted Williams is one of the greatest baseball players in history. He played part of 4 decades, 39, the 40s, the 50s, and the 60s. Last baseball player to hit .406, called the Splendid Splinter. His hand-eye coordination was just stunning. But you know what? Ted Williams never once played in a postseason game. He never, ever played in a playoff game or a World Series game. And they asked Ted Williams, the rest of his life, they asked him, hey, Ted, what was the best team you ever played for? Ted, what was the best team you ever played for? What was the best team you ever played for? And Ted Williams says, the best team I ever played for was the United States Marine Corps. Because in 1943, 1944, and 1945, he was drafted by the Marines and he had to become a fighter pilot. And then they took him for 2 more years during the Korean War. He lost 5 years of his professional life to the Marine Corps, and he hated them every single day because he couldn't be playing baseball. But he said their honesty, their integrity, their service, their dedication to excellence, their sacrificial nature makes them hands down the best team I've ever played for. So when you think about what does it mean to be excellent in the Catholic tradition, what does it mean to be a man of faith, a man of virtue? How do we know if we're excellent? Where does this even come from? Well, this idea comes from these 2 philosophers right here. One is a pagan who lived 2,500 years ago. His name's Aristotle. The other one is Thomas Aquinas, who lived in the 14th century. Aristotle wrote a book called the Nicomachean Ethics. Thomas More wrote the Summa Theologica, but they both had the same point of departure. What makes for human excellence? What makes for human happiness? What is going to help us be the best and brightest we possibly can be? And they both, even though they came from 2 different traditions, came to the very same conclusion. Excellence requires virtue. Excellence requires virtue. And if you look at the word virtue, for those of you who took Latin in high school, you know that the root word of virtue is vir. V-I-R. It's the very root word of virtue, and the word V-I-R means man. It means male. It means the virtues necessary for a society to flourish are virtues of honesty and integrity and fortitude and justice and prudence. But take a look at how this works, right? So we have 2 types of virtues in our life. We focus on something called our resume virtues. Resume virtues, LinkedIn virtues, right? These are our skills, our degrees, our sales track record, our revenue. All of these things are called resume virtues. But then there's something also in our life called eulogy virtues. Those are things that people say about us when we die. My argument today is that if you've got really high resume virtues and really high eulogy virtues, you're unstoppable. Because then you have hit the definition of excellence. And excellence can trump everything. Because here's one thing about Americans. We will still pay for excellence. We will still pay for excellence. But let's take a look at where you get these virtues. So the inner life versus the outer life. So we get our resume virtues from the university, from Votex, from the School of Hard Knocks. We get our eulogy virtues from our church or our synagogue or our family. We get our resume virtues to get an occupation. We have our eulogy virtues to give us a vocation, a calling, vocari. One of those things are our skills. Those are resume virtues. And the other thing is called our character. Those are eulogy virtues. One is what we do. The other is how we do it. But look at these last two. Our resume virtues is what we get paid for. Our eulogy virtues is what we get praised for. Our resume virtues can get us rich. Our eulogy virtues can get us into heaven. These two different types of virtues. And when we're young, I'm not criticizing the young, I was probably the same way. We're focused on our resume virtues, 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 and too often we're neglectful of the eulogy virtues. Too often we're neglectful of those things that people are really going to remember us for. We lost my mom 15 months ago. She died of Alzheimer's, and it's a horrible, terrible disease. And that poor woman, who was a lovely, lovely woman, suffered terribly in her last few months. It was extraordinarily difficult. She and my father were married for 64 years. She got married when she was 18. She had 7 children. She had 30 foster children. She, though, had no, what we would call resume virtues. She never really worked outside of the home. She didn't know how to balance a book. She didn't know how to turn on a computer. She didn't ever have a sales position. She was dedicated, loyal, faithful wife and mother with no resume virtues. But in my small town in central Minnesota, it took 6 hours for the people to walk by her casket to tell me and my brothers and sisters about all of her eulogy virtues, what she had done. Let me tell you a story about your mother. When I was at my lowest point, she showed up, she helped me, she prayed for me, she wrote me a card, she gave me some money. Her eulogy virtues. So my argument today is that our Catholic faith is predicated upon two things: what you do and how you do it. Yes, you have to have those things on the left hand of the screen. You have to have credentials and skills and experiences and your successes. But it's maybe even more important that we have the honesty, the integrity, the fortitude, the kindness, the charity, the humor going forth. And you can actually do a little assessment of yourself. Here we are still early in 2024. Here we are in the third quarter of Lent. Ask yourself this question: what are my resume virtues? What do I have on my docket for all of my resume virtues? Go through it. See if you're happy. Is there anything you want to add to that list? Yesterday I talked to somebody who came up to me and he said, God, my resume virtue, I really want to get my MBA. I really want to get my MBA. I think I really need to add my MBA. I go, well, why don't you go to an MBA? He goes, oh, it's just so hard. I haven't really registered for courses right now. I said, you are going to flunk 100% of the courses that you never take. If you don't enroll for an MBA, you're not going to get an MBA. You can't just want to have the MBA. Those credentials are sometimes hard to get. So what would you add in 2024 if you needed to add something to that list? And I have them write them all out. They look at them. There are 7 things on this list. Are you happy with this list? Should we add something? Then I say do the same thing. What about the eulogy virtues? I know this sounds morbid, but you ought to go home and practice writing your own obituary. You ought to go. This is Lent, right? Memento homo, pulvis est. Remember, man, you are dust, and to dust you shall return. Go write your obituary. Does it say what it wants you to say? Does it fulfill what you are aiming for? Is that the plan that you have? And then I would write down your eulogy virtues. And they say, okay, what am I going to do this year? What am I going to do this year? What virtue could I add this year onto my portfolio of virtues to more diversify my eulogy virtues? Is there one that you're working on? Is there one that you're working on? My wife suggested for me that I get humility. I said, humility? I'm God's gift to humility. Right? You want to see humility? I'll show you. Right? It's kind of a joke there. But my point is, have you done that assessment? What does that look like in your life? What does it look like in your 1, 3, and 5-year plan? Now, thankfully, the church has given us models of heroic virtue, and I'm pleased to say that the biography of this saint, the Catholic saint of entrepreneurs, the Catholic saint of merchants, the Catholic saint of business leaders, is done. It's up at the University of Notre Dame. They have an imprint called St. Augustine Press. They're coming out with this book that my colleague and I have just finished on St. Alma Bona. St. Omobono means good man, right? And he did something really unusual in the history of the Catholic Church. He changed the very definition of sainthood. See, he died in 1197. And when he died in 1197, there was just this massive funeral. The overwhelming support of the community, hundreds and hundreds and even thousands of people spontaneously went to the site of his death. And the bishop said, there's something supernatural about this. We can't explain why so many people came here to recognize and to feel and to touch and to see him, to be in his presence when he died. So they wrote to the Pope. The Pope then was Innocent III, and they said, we think we have a saint in our presence. We want you to declare him as a member of the sainthood in heaven. And for the first time in the history of the Catholic Church, Pope Innocent III declared that sanctity, in order to be a saint, required not only a story of your life that represents virtue. He goes, now we're going to require 2 miracles. They invented the theology of sainthood on this guy right here. So they sent out the investigators, they sent out the bishops, they all took notes, and they found 7 or 8 miracles attributed to him, and within 2 short years he was canonized. Here's why this is important. He was the only lay person in the entire Middle Ages who was canonized. The only lay person in the entire Middle Ages who was canonized. The church recognized in 1199 that being a part of a business community gives you an opportunity for heroic virtue, and your work has already been pre-sanctified. You realize that? Your work has already been pre-sanctified. I remember sitting in Mass when I was about 21 years old. I was over in Rome, and the priest got up there, and he was talking about the Italian habit of having riposo in the afternoon, having this little nap. And he goes, Americans come over here and they feel guilty about taking a nap in the middle of the afternoon because, well, it's in the middle of the afternoon, right? You've had a bunch of wine for lunch and you're sleeping in the middle of the afternoon. You're not exactly that productive. It doesn't really fit in with Anglo-Saxon Protestant work ethic. And he says, don't you know that Jesus took a nap once when he was a human? And because Jesus took a nap once, it's been pre-sanctified. I went, boy, that just gives me all kinds of comfort. So every time I take my little 15-minute power nap, I say a little prayer and go, this has been pre-sanctified. My wife says, hey, you don't have to take your trousers off for it. Because I take my trousers off. When I take a nap, I get ready to take a nap. And so St. Omobono was a lay saint who's been canonized because at the very beginning of the documents of the church, here's what the document of the church says. This is 1199. It begins by, it is difficult for one who practices business to divest himself of religious indifference. The church recognized in 1199 that business owners, as a class, were so busy running their business, they didn't have time for prayer. They were so busy running their business, they didn't have time for prayer. But his attachments to the Catholic Church, his daily pieties, he went to Mass every day, he went to Eucharist every day, he did lauds, vigils, and matins. His practices saved him from the perverse and miserable practices of the marketplace. Because St. Omobono, in his Vita, said that sometimes business is a grindstone. We say a treadmill, we say rat race. The grindstone would have been very, very common. It would have been one of the most ubiquitous things that anybody could see. Something that you continually have to pump. You're pumping the grindstone. You're pumping the grindstone. You're sharpening the grindstone. It wears you down. And we get worn down by life, right? Ernest Hemingway has that famous quote, life breaks us all. Some of us get stronger in the broken places. That didn't make much sense to me when I first read it at 20. It makes a lot more sense to me reading it at 60. Because life is, people ask me all the time, how you guys doing? How's your family? How are the kids? I go, well, an hour ago they were all right. When you have 5 kids and you try really, you never know what's going to happen. Again, this isn't an insight that it needs to be expressed probably because it's so obvious, but I used to think that the heavy lifting of parenthood was when my kids were 7, 8, 9, diaper bags, bottles, getting them in the van, out of the van. We were perpetually tired and overwhelmed. That's easy. The heavy lifting of being a parent is when your kids are 19, 20, 25, 27, 30 and they're facing real moral dilemmas, real ethical issues, having their heart broken or not getting into this position or losing a job. That's because they're still your kids. When they're 9, you can kiss their knee and put a Band-Aid on it and boo-boo and everything's all right. But when they're 29, it's a little trickier. So St. Homo Bono reminds us that providing the best experience that we possibly can is really important. So if I look at the Catholic Church today, what do I see? Do I see a church that is both providing resume virtues and eulogy virtues? What is the Catholic experience today that you're providing? Is it vital? Is it dynamic? Is it rich? Is it alive? Is it ossified? Is it under a bushel basket? Because the times that I struggle, sometimes when I look at the institutional church, I get a little frustrated at times. I can't understand why some of these decisions are made. There seems to be lack of moral vision. There seems to be lack of moral clarity. There are times when I just go, I don't understand what's happening, and I spend a lot of time in Rome. I talk to people over there all the time. I'm going to Rome for the entire month of May. Our apartment is 100 meters from the Vatican. And it gets me a little bit frustrated, and there's a little bit of mixed messaging, and there's a little bit of ambiguity. And I'm going, geez, this is really hard. I get a little frustrated. And then I get a call from John and says, will you come talk to a men's group? 6:45 is Mass. I live an hour away. I go, 6:45 is Mass? Yeah, I can get there. I go, how many people do you think are going to be at this men's group? I think he's going to say 6. I think I'm going to get 10. He goes, oh no, you'll get 50 or 60 men there. I go, you mean there are going to be 50 or 60 men who are going to go to Mass on a Friday morning? And they're going to give up some of that day to come in and listen to somebody talk about the faith? And the message that I'm going to give them is, I know life is hard, but you got to get better. Right? The message I'm going to give them is that if people in this room aren't strong, we're screwed. The message I'm going to tell them that is, I don't know what happens in November, but either way, bad things could really occur. We have an election coming up, and the world seems to have turned its back on something that we call truth or the transcendent goodness. The good, the true, and the beautiful used to be accepted as universals because there you'll see the face of God, and nobody's accepting the good, the true, and the beautiful anymore. You mean to tell me you're going to have 50 or 75 men that are going to come up there, they're going to listen to this, they're going to take it seriously, they're going to try to be better husbands and fathers and sons and brothers? He goes, yeah, that's about right. I go, well, I'll be there. I'll be there. Because we need each other. I'm telling you, it's really, really hard sometimes at a university to see what I see at a university and to see people actually rejoicing over an October 7th attack where 1,700 people were killed, murdered, women were cut open, pregnant women were cut open. All the women, including the grandmothers, were raped as an act of war violence. And to see people on my college campus say that that's okay, that it's justified, that it should be celebrated, and let's capture it on GoPro films so we can be martyrs in heaven. And it's like, are you kidding me? This is real? This is happening right now on my campus? A third of my students are saying this? And they're saying it's okay to do this because, well, the Jews have a lot of money. It's okay to say this because, well, the Jews are white. It's okay to say this because, well, they're oppressing people. It's okay to kill innocent people and cut open mothers? So I said, I'm going to come up there and listen, my default setting is optimism. I think that Christ conquered death and we're gonna be in heaven, that the victory's already won. I got news for you. We got some hell to go through before we get there. I teach Dante. Dante's poem starts in hell. It's called the Inferno. It's called the Inferno. But Dante survives hell, he goes to purgatory, he survives purgatory, and he goes to Paradiso. So that metaphor, we live in hellacious times, I get it. This is so unusual for me to say because I'm, as I said, an optimistic, positive person. I look around sometimes now and I go, my God, why have you forsaken me? And so when John Reardon, my good friend, says to me, no, there'll be 70 or so men up there because they're hungry for this, I say, God bless you. And then I say, thank you for providing that example. Because if I look around and I can see other men out there who are successful and hardworking and love their wives and love their children, you know what I say? If that dude can do it, I can do it. If that dude can do it, I can do it. If he can do it, I can do it. You know what the communion of saints is? Communion saints are normal people who displayed heroic virtue throughout their life. And you know what we're supposed to say when we see the saints? Oh, if that dude can do it, I can do it. If Thomas More can do it, I can do it. If St. Omabona can do it, I can do it. If St. Peter Chanel can do it, I can do it. That's what the communion of the saints is. Communion of the saints is to give us examples of somebody who went through the same muck that we went through and they persevered. If Mother Teresa can do it, I can do it. And so I want to thank you for your kind attention. I don't know if there's any questions or anything, but I want to say tonight, when we say our unique prayers, I'm going to keep you all included in those prayers, but I want you to keep up the good work, keep up the struggle, keep up the faith, because like the United States Marine Corps, I think if the Marine Corps gives up and they abdicate what they stand for, I think that the military is going to have even more of a recession, and it's going to be degraded. And if the Catholic Church gives up on the good, the true, and the beautiful, if the Catholic Church gives up on the idea that all human beings are created in the likeness and image of God, if the Catholic Church gives up the idea that there are some virtues, man, that men have to embrace and men have to be men in this society, if we give up on that, nobody else is going to be there. Nobody else is going to be there. So thank you very much. God love you. Thank you for the kind invitation.
And Dr. Voss, thank you very, very much. That was fantastic. I certainly do appreciate it. We do have a few minutes for questions and answers. If we have questions, again, I'll be any questions for Dr. Voss here? Thoughts, observations?
Thanks, Doctor. That definitely didn't suck as bad as I thought it would. But no, my question is around work ethic and children. I think it's been said that, you know, kids just don't see their parents going to work anymore or their fathers going to work, and I kind of struggle with that because, you know, I work from home and I'm on my work is on the computer or phone all day, and that's something that I tell my son and, you know, my kids, hey, that's bad, you know, don't do that. So any thoughts on that and how you can instill that work ethic into children in this day and age?
Yeah, it's tricky, right? Because even when I'm at home, if I'm in my office and I'm in front of the computer, my family doesn't think I'm working, right? Oh, hey, Dad, when are you working today? Like right now? That sort of thing. But no, it's tricky, and I want to begin by admitting a failure. So my kids grew up in a house without television. We had no television. I've only played one video game in my life. It's called Pong. It was like back in 1979 where a ball, some of you might remember Pong. And for the first 20 years of that, we could control all the inputs into our house, tried to cultivate a life of the mind. We did languages every night together as a family. They did Greek and Latin. I told them that if they could learn a language, I'd take them to the country of their choice. My son John Paul worked on English and wanted me to take him to Australia. I said, that's not how this works. But the younger two children got iPhones like everybody else in 7th grade, 8th grade, 9th grade, whatever, for school. And all of a sudden, I realized that my kids were playing video games. I realized that my kids, in spite of not having a TV, were able to circumvent that little loophole in the family life. And my 19-year-old son, Aquinas, who's a freshman at the University of Georgia, I think he's addicted to TikTok. In spite of my very best efforts, the vigilant nature of me trying to make sure that this wasn't those social media devices are so addictive. The dopamine that they continue to... I'm sure when I was in high school, I didn't get invited to parties. I just didn't know I would get invited to parties, right? Now it's everywhere. So the psychological damage it's doing to young women, the level of unhappiness, the amount of alienation from the young people, it is so ubiquitous that my students, they can't have the phone out, can't even have the phone out in their class. Their phone is in their book bag and it makes a sound. You can just see them panicking. It's almost like they're having withdrawals from heroin or something. Yeah. And the message probably just says, Chick-fil-A has a buy one, get one free sale, right? It's not even a life or death message. And so I say this to realize how difficult it is to try and create a world where the life of the mind is still primary. So it's related to your question. I understand that when the nature of work changes and that somebody is sitting in front of a computer still doing work, it doesn't have that same kind of external focus like it's work. It doesn't. You're not wearing the hard hat with the lunchbox, right? And I guess the best conversation you can have is, see our house, this doesn't happen by accident. You see what I'm doing, you see how, and let them sit in on it. There's a story of a friend of mine, though, who's a very big senior executive. He runs a company, and he took his daughter to work day. This is about 10 years ago. It's kind of funny. And he went in, they read the newspaper, he made a few phone calls, he talked to a couple people, and at 1 o'clock she says, well, Dad, when does the work start? Right? Because she had this conception of work that we were going to be doing like pulling weeds or something. So intellectual labor is still labor, but it has to be manifested that way. So I would just say, show them the calendar, show them the appointment, show them that you're never late for the appointment, that you're always on, that you prepare yourself professionally in front of the camera. You're not using ums or this, and you don't have your camera turned off. Demonstrate that kind of, what we call that professional bearing, that professional deportment. My wife's a champ at this. I was telling Tony, so my wife and I have been married for 35 years, and for 33 of those years I kept telling her, honey, you're beautiful, I love you, I wouldn't change anything about you, you're the love of my life. And then she did something 2 years ago that had me reconsider that phrase. She went out and got a job. And now I have to say, honey, I think you're even more beautiful, more sexy, because you got a paycheck coming in. Every 2 weeks that paycheck comes in, I go, I told you I couldn't love you anymore. I was lying. Because I do love you more now because there's money coming in. This is so great. I should have had you do this years ago, right? Because it takes a little of the pressure off. But even yesterday morning, from the waist up, she looked like $1 million, but she still had the pajamas on and the fuzzy fur feet, right? That sort of thing. So it isn't easy, but intellectual work is still work, and showing that you show up and you give them the calendar and you show all the things that you do is probably the best we can hope for. Thank you for that.
Good morning. Thanks for coming out. Could you expand on when you talk about your works pre-sanctified?
Excuse me?
Pre-sanctified?
Oh, okay.
work?
So what this priest was trying to say all these years ago is that sanctification, this is the theory behind Opus Dei. Opus Dei says that work should be sanctified, that your work is an opportunity to grow in grace, to grow in patience. So I'll give you an example. I'm sitting in my office, and I'm trying to get something done, trying to finish something, and a student walks in. And my student's a grade grubber, right? She's there to talk to me, and she's wondering why she got a 97 and not a 98 on her. And there was a time where I would be impatient because I don't have time for this nonsense. And then I realized that she's a child of God. She is created in the likeness and image of God. So I have to say, oh, she deserves a certain amount of time. So I'm actually offering it up, as it were, to try and give me the gift of patience, to give me the fortitude, to ease her concern. It's an act of spiritual or corporal mercy. So I have just reconfigured work as an act of sanctification. C.S. Lewis said, properly speaking, let's say you missed lunch. If you think about it properly, it could be a sacrifice. It could be a moment of sanctification rather than, darn it, I missed lunch today. Now you can say, oh, I'll offer that up. So if Jesus already worked, Jesus was the son of a carpenter, he has pre-sanctified the act of working. It's already been infused with holiness if it's done the proper way. You're not cheating people, you're not exploiting people, you're charging a fair wage. And so when you're participating in that effort, you're actually doing something that our Lord did, and therefore it's good and it's holy. So that's what I mean, that work properly considered can be considered pre-sanctified, and that when we do our job to the best of our abilities, to the highest virtues that we have, both the resume and the eulogy virtues, we are then emulating Christ in a real way because we are engaging in work that's been pre-sanctified. That's what that means.
Awesome. Thank you. Well, one more quick question.
Point of order, really quick. The only incident I can remember of Jesus taking a nap in the Gospels was when he was asleep in the storm in the boat.
Yeah.
Is that what you mean?
No, we just mean as a human being, people take naps. As a human being,
When did Jesus take a nap? Besides
in the storm, that's what the priest said. Yeah, he was sleeping, and he chided other people for falling asleep, but that wasn't a nap. They were abdicating their responsibility in the Garden of Gethsemane.
Dr. Voss, thank you for being here.
My pleasure.
Very inspiring. I'm a former lecturer of philosophy at Morehouse College, and I taught a business ethics class. My question for you is this. John Cena wrote a book called The Restoration of Christian Culture. And you might have heard of the durable goods movement among Catholics, agrarians, and others who say that if we're going to raise our kids, they may go to college. But college, according to the statistics, often corrupts students who are exposed to woke ideologies, etc. My question is now, do you think that durable goods, that is, the older trades associated with civilization, is something that fathers can point their children to in an age that's now being dominated by technology and AI?
It's an excellent question. So again, when I was a child growing up in Minnesota, every single male at the time had to take a class in shop. It was either small motors, electronics of some kind, building the house. So this is at a time when Catholic farmers probably had 6, 7, 8 children. A lot of them were going to work on the farm, but now you only need one person to run the farm. So all of these other farmers, boys, were going out and learning the trades. They were going to vocational school, or what we call VOTEC. 15 years ago, the Department of Education in Minnesota closed all the vocational training down in high school in the name of pre-calculus, pre-algebra, and pre-college. Only 40% of students go on to college. That meant 60% had no other alternative. I'm grateful to say that they've opened up those vocational classes again, because the one job that isn't really in danger right now is the job of the plumber or the electrician or the person who plows snow, right? Because there's no app on the phone that's going to unplug your toilet. We're still going to need human beings, and those are called the dirty jobs, right? Mike Rowe's making a living off of the dirty jobs. And of course there's dignity in the dirty jobs. Of course there's going to be opportunity. As I said, I was with a real estate firm yesterday, commercial real estate. About a third of the people in there were what they call chiefs. These are people who are running 20, 30, 40, 50, 60-story buildings in Atlanta, and they're in charge of the entire physical plant of those buildings. And they all started off as electricians or plumbers or contractors, and now they know how to read spreadsheets, they know how to read blueprints, they're taking estimates, they're moving. So, and they can't find enough workers. And so there is going to be, I think, a return to the trades that we used to call the trades, because those are the jobs. I saw a sign driving out here this morning. There's welders. They said starting salary $110,000 for welders. If you want to be an underwater welder, I never even thought about that, but that's $140,000 starting. On the back of plumbing trucks, it'll say, plumbers wanted, 401k, flexible hours. You want to teach your kids or coach your kids' baseball team? You can with this company. This is plumbers that are advertising to other plumbers saying, we're going to give you more work-life balance. You're going to work your 40 hours or your 50 hours, but we're going to give free time. So I believe that some of those jobs are going to be more attractive in the future. But then I'm sometimes wrong, or a lot of times I'm wrong. But thank you for that question.
Dr. Voss, thank you very much again. Awesome, fantastic. If you want to learn more about Dr. Voss and his mission, you can go to www.ethikos.com, ETHIKOS.com. I know we're running a few minutes over, so I'm going to kind of rush through some of these announcements. Thank you very much for the priests. Thank you very much, Father Lino and Father Tamaru, for coming in and hearing our confessions. The men's club needs help this Friday night with a fish fry this evening. So if you can stop by to help clean up, please do that. Also, the Holy Week Family Mission are open to sign up now at the SBC website. This is a great opportunity if you've never done this. During the Holy Week, there's about 75 or 100 people. We all get together. It's appropriate for all ages. They go and help families in need in the local area. So if you want to do that, you can sign up on the SBC website. And finally, Friday, April 19th, we have Mr. John, I don't want to devalue doctor, Mr. John Henry Spann coming to speak to us about what your kids wish you knew. So if you enjoyed this content, please bring a friend. Thank you all very much, and we'll let you know when this is posted on the SPC YouTube channel. Take care.
Minnesota.